Somebody posed the question to me recently, and I pose it to you now. When is the first time the thought occurred to you that you might be a leader? Almost everybody can describe when and where they were when the idea first registered in their mind. For me, I remember being shocked when, about age 12, my mother told me that people had been saying I was a leader. I remember sort of a surreal moment of surprise at that possibility, but it stuck with me. And maybe for you, you can name the person that first identified you as a potential leader. The person who first believed in you before anybody else did. My real question is, who do you owe the most for calling leadership out of you in your younger years? Does a name come to mind? Who believed in you before anybody else did? Who gave you leadership opportunities and responsibilities that you knew were beyond your current capabilities? And who kept saying to you, you can handle this, you are a good leader, hang in there. It all boils down to seeing potential in somebody and speaking it into their life, even when it seems risky. Think about Barnabas and Paul. Paul's a former persecutor in the church. It was a huge risk. And I think back to even how my father believed in me when it came to leadership. And I look at some of the mistakes I certainly have made along the way, but he continued to believe. We all owe huge debts to those who planted leadership seeds in us, those who opened leadership doors for us. None of us got to where we are today all by ourselves. My point to all this is this: the same responsibility rests on us to find people that we believe in, that we will speak courage into, that we will develop as leaders. If ever there is a time when church leaders need to step up, raise the bar, and frankly be good, godly Christian leaders, this is it. And a massive part of our responsibility is raising a leadership culture. I don't believe a leadership culture just happens in our churches, and in the same way, I believe here today we can learn some lessons together on developing a leadership culture. So first one, you do the calling. Good leaders rarely just appear. Mostly it is up to us to develop them, but you can't develop everybody. You only have a certain amount of time, and the selection of the people that you're going to invest your life into is so important. An important lesson that I've learned along the way is that it's up to me to seek out those leaders to raise them up, rather than just choosing the first person that puts up their hand. Now, don't get me wrong. Those people are probably lovely people, and among those people, you may choose some who will be leaders. But when you look at the life of Jesus, it is clear that he went out and he didn't take the first 12 that showed up, but he chose the 12 that he was going to invest his life into. Why? Because he was leaving the fate of the church in the hands of those 12 men. But how do you know who to choose? Well, there are many theories on this, but 4 quick keys. 1, choose people that show signs of leadership. That might sound really obvious, but sometimes we choose people that are just nice people, or that are very talented people, or have some sort of skill, or that complement us and we think that we'll get along with. Or here's the worst one, we choose people as leaders because we don't want them to leave the church. No, look for people already exhibiting leadership in some form. Leaders will have leadership in their blood and will ultimately find a way to lead. Some of them will simply be leading peer groups, some in their workplaces and others in our church context. Here's a thought. We tend to only choose the leaders that we see in the church context, and we can miss the other leaders. To identify them, you may need to have your eyes open on all the different contexts. Perhaps go and visit them in their marketplace, get to know them, see how they interact in social environments, but pick those that are already exhibiting some sort of leadership. Number 2 is who is asking the questions. The people that are asking questions that sometimes can even be a bit of a thorn in your side, that want to see the world a little bit different, are not the people we should be shunning. Instead, encourage them because they may just be your next leaders. Jesus didn't choose his disciples from the established group, but specifically from a region that was known for being outsiders, that were willing to challenge conventional thinking. These people will often have a bit of pluck. Sometimes we choose people who won't rock the boat and are frankly boring and never question anything. Don't be too put off by somebody who challenges the way things are done. The third thing, look for people that are willing to carry this vision. This might sound like a bit of a contradiction to the last point, but you need people that will carry your vision to walk in the direction that you're going. Now, this will take a bit of discernment to determine if they are a complete maverick or if they are people willing to fight the kingdom fight with you. But certainly you want the spirit of people that are hungry to both fight and follow. My final thought here is choose people with grit. Grit is that determination to stick at it, somebody that won't cut and run. It's interesting that when Jesus chose some of the disciples, it says he chose disciples that were washing their nets. Now, in the story that comes from, people are actually crowding around him, but he looks over the crowd and goes for the blokes that are committed to the job at hand and would follow it through. A good thing about this point is you can test people on this. I remember a young guy that wanted to be a leader when I was a youth pastor, and he had so much ego to boot. And I said to him, mate, your first job is just turning up and stacking the chairs at the beginning of the night. He pretty much left the church about 2 weeks later because I didn't immediately make him a leader. Honestly, don't be afraid to test people. So when you find potential leaders demonstrating these sorts of qualities, of course be prayerful about the decision. It goes without saying that we want the go or no from God. But then you approach them. They may never have had somebody like you speak that possibility of leadership into their life. Challenge them when you approach them. Don't be too whimsical about them. Let them know there will be a cost involved in growing in leadership, and their first test will be whether they rise to this very challenge. So a few other thoughts on developing a leadership culture. Get close to these people. I'm increasingly of the opinion that when you develop leaders, you have a twofold job: to develop leadership skill and to develop character. Psalm 78:72 says, David led them with integrity of heart and with skillful hands. A real key to this is the principle of invitation and challenge. What do I mean by that? Invitation is all about you inviting them into your life. So literally, for us, it's inviting people into our house, sometimes even into our recreational life. In doing this, you'll show people that you care for them and you're drawing them in and showing them genuine love. But challenge them in that you love them enough to see areas of weakness in their life. So for me at the moment, I for many years have had a small group of leaders that I'm developing come into my home regularly so they can experience both invitation but also challenge. When they're in my home, what happens? They see what my life looks like in that environment. They learn so many things like how I discipline my children, that my house is tidy when people are coming over, how to do hospitality. They're invited to our birthdays and different events. They see what generosity looks like, and on the list goes. In the same way, do a bit of life with them. Look for opportunities to invite them in, to be with you, driving to an airport or going to a conference or plan an event with them or speak at a meeting. As you do this, you can't help but observe their strengths and weaknesses and vice versa. But because you've invited them in, you've also earned the right to challenge them. And in fact, you have a responsibility to bring challenge into the lives of people you're raising up. With some of the people that I'm growing in leadership at the moment, I'm involved in all sorts of areas of their life. For example, just how to do a budget or what's happening in their relational world. And with all of them, I get to bring a challenge because I have invited them into my life. Now, not in any arrogant manner, but in a way that will help them to grow. Challenge always happens best in the context of personal relationship. Of course, this is a reminder to you that your life will be observed, so you better practice what you preach. And I think a key for this is humility. Look, true biblical leadership is saturated in humility. Jesus was explicit about the way his disciples were to lead. Matthew 20, 25 to 28. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It should not be so among you. So developing future leaders demands that we're humble. Here's the truth. Oftentimes we'll be developing people that will have greater skill and greater potential than we do. It takes a bit of humility in us. But if we see our role in sort of a parental concept, we're joyfully cheering them on, perhaps even as they surpass us. Another thought, get out of the classroom. You know, we don't have time now, but if I asked you 2 questions to really dwell on them, I wonder what your answers would be. These are the questions. First one, think for a moment about your own life and the top 5 times of greatest growth in your life. The second one would be, think of the top 5 sermons that you've heard preached in your lifetime. Now, if we had an opportunity to really play that out, I just about guarantee the times of growth would come fairly quickly to mind and would be linked to real life experiences. But you'd probably struggle to give me the top 5 sermons in your life. The reasons for this is we grow when we are actually carrying the real weight of life experience. And if you want somebody to grow in leadership, they actually need to lead. I think this point is so important. Don't do your leadership development in the classroom alone. In fact, as much as possible, get out of the classroom. Instead, you need to allow new leaders to experience real leadership tests and pressure. In this way, they will actually be hungry for the leadership advice that you have to give them, rather than simply studying information for an exam that they may never use. If I made a mistake in the early days, it was this, thinking that my teaching of leadership theory would create leaders. I've learnt that to create leaders, I have to allow people to lead, and then they'll become hungry for that theory. Now, this is going to mean a few things for us as leaders. The big one is they won't do the things as well as you would do them. That is okay. You need to let go and allow people to make mistakes. Now, very importantly, this doesn't mean hands off. Another thing I'm learning is that in the early days, you have to be very hands-on. I used to be worried about being a micromanager leader. You know, latest leadership theory and wisdom is saying that you actually need to be hands-on in those early days. You need to be instructional. If you look at the life of Jesus in the early days with his disciples, he's very instructional, he's very directive, showing them exactly how to do things and patiently helping them. Sometimes I think we send people out with no support and just expect them to be great leaders. No, we need to be in there with them. We need to be clear about expectations and debrief the experience, asking them about their learnings, but filling in the gaps of their understanding. However, later on in their ministry life, Jesus did push the disciples out of the nest and he sent them off on their own to do mission. That's an important phase as well, as sometimes things can be tough out there. An experienced leader knows that things can be tough. So those leaders in that phase need to go through the pressure, the discouragement at times, the threats, and they actually need to hit sometimes low points. And at this point, often younger leaders will start to doubt their call and even their decision to follow. Be careful not to rescue in this phase of leadership, because some of these struggles and pressures are so important as their leadership capacity is tested. Our job is to help them let go of their old securities and find their security in Jesus. That's what we do then. Point them to Jesus. Jesus often spoke to their disciples, to his disciples, and told them, fear not. So more than just skills, we are meant to impart the grace of Jesus and work much more on character that says stay close to Jesus continually. Help them find their energy and source of life and him alone. But this wonderful learning comes from on-the-job training, not stuck in front of a whiteboard. So the next thought is hold them accountable. There's a great saying that says, we get what we inspect. And it is so true. There's a good old story of the son who's out shooting arrows with his dad, and his dad paints a target on the tree and tells his son to aim at it while he goes and makes lunch. And of course, the little boy aims his arrow. He misses the target, but he hits another tree. So while his father's away, he just simply goes up to that tree, paints the target around the arrow and says to his dad, see, I hit the target. Now, it can be a little bit like that for us in Christian life. God sets a target for us and we miss it, and then we spiritualize the outcome, saying things like, oh, maybe this is what God had in mind all along, or God moves in mysterious ways. And of course, there's a little bit of truth in some of that, but maybe sometimes we just need to ask some tough questions, and that would help us all. We'd all learn from that. We don't get what we expect, we get what we inspect. So when you're setting goals with your leaders, make clear and measurable goals and hold them accountable to those goals. Then have real conversations when they're not reached. Nobody gets beat up, but this is a great opportunity for growth. Think about Jesus and his disciples. He doesn't mince words. Remember his takedown of Peter. Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God. Now that statement came with relationship, but I guarantee that was a learning moment for him. It's okay to fail. In fact, it is expected. But for goodness sake, have a conversation about it. Of course, holding people accountable also shows the up-and-coming leader that you are serious about accountability. Another thought here is ultimately a leader will multiply themselves. I believe from day one, a key to developing a leadership culture is that the leaders that you're developing understand that they too are to develop other leaders. Now, at first, that won't be in their capacity, but very early on, you're speaking into them that truth that they have to pass on what they're learning. That their ultimate success in leadership is how many other leaders are developed into their role. One of the non-negotiables that Jesus makes clear in his last words is that disciples make disciples. So this has to be key for us. The principle of multiplication must be a part of your language very early on. Ultimately, everybody should be thinking about how they grow up somebody else. Let's be honest here. Ultimately, that leader may need to leave the domain of your leadership to really walk into what God has for them. Certainly when it comes to multiplying other leaders, but also just the fruit of their own ministries. Now, this is going to be scary for them and sometimes scary for us, but this is, of course, where we see things like other or new churches being birthed. To really see a leader multiply, there is a good chance you're going to have to set them free. And here's my last thought. Get over disappointments. We need to get over disappointments. You know, being really frank here, every leader has experienced the ups and downs of raising up other leaders and the disappointments of finding that people have decided to leave or sometimes abandon the ministry and you've been raising them up. It's happened to me. It has happened to good leaders. It happened to Jesus, by the way. So I guarantee that it's going to happen to you. We just can't let these disappointments stop us from developing leaders. We only get better at working out the bugs in our own leadership as we keep on with a good heart, picking ourselves up and continuing to sow. Jossie Chacko says it like this. He says, you have to enlarge your pain threshold. And this is so true. As you grow as a leader, you'll experience just all the time a little bit more pain in your life. You know, Jesus grown deeply, the scripture tells us. So pick yourselves up and start again. So I encourage all of you. I hope this has been an encouragement to you. Please don't let me give you the impression, certainly I've got it all worked out. I wish I did. But what I pray is that we will all, in God's grace, be strengthened to develop a leadership culture and the people that are around you. Bless you heaps.